Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. So most of NHL free agent frenzy has already passed. We've seen a lot of big names sign or re-sign to their teams. Whether that's Johnny Gaudreau, for example, leaving Calgary and going all the way to Columbus, Ohio to play for the Blue Jackets, to join his former teammate Eric Goodbranson, who also signed a 4x4. Or Andre Burakovsky leaving the Colorado Avalanche to go to the Seattle Kraken, the second former Avalanche to go to the Kraken in back-to-back years, joining his former teammate as well in Philip Grubauer. There's a lot of traffic that has already happened, but the great thing about the NHL offseason is that despite the frenzy being pretty much over, there's still a lot of really good players available. And today in this video, we're just going to be talking about the 10 guys that I think are the best remaining free agents that could do the most to help a team right now, and what I think they'll get, what I think the best fit for them roster-wise will be, and you know, what team do I think ultimately will sign them, and what kind of money will they get from that team. So starting off, number 10 is Ryan Donato. I think Ryan Donato is a really, really good player. He's only 25 years old. I was honestly really surprised that he wasn't qualified by Seattle. In 13 less than 14 minutes of ice time last year, so he was really a bomb six guy, third line, fourth line. He put up 31 points in 74 games. He's not great defensively, but he's not exactly a complete liability. And yes, he is a more offensive-minded bottom six player. So if you are a team that's looking for a third-line checking center, third-line checking winger or forward, he's not really going to fit that role. He's not an exceptional skater, but he does have good vision. And when he has played on the power play, he has shown flashes of being a contributor in that aspect, because he does have the playmaking, the goal scoring, but he hasn't really been used there. And I think this is a prime candidate of someone who's going to sign a one-year deal. His teams are going to view him as a fringe NHL or a fourth liner. They're going to pay him less than $1 million or less, and he's going to give them pretty good value. And hopefully for him at least, at some point, if he has a really good season, he might be able to catapult himself into that kind of top 9 range, right, where he's a legit third liner, a consistent third liner, and he can get some more interest from NHL teams. But right now, at this point in free agency, I have him going to the Winnipeg Jets. Now, Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think, is gone by this season. I think Winnipeg wants to move on. I don't think they want to keep Dubois and continue to drag this process out, right? He does have another year after this one of restricted free agency, but I just don't see Winnipeg holding on to him, dealing with potential issues. And we saw what he did in Columbus, where he just gave up on the team. You don't want that going into next season, where Dubois will be on the ice and not giving it his all. So right now you would look at that and say, well, Donato's playing fourth line minutes. That center core is stacked down the middle, and a lot of these guys have tenure. Harkins, Appleton have been with this team for a long time. How is he going to be able to find his way onto the wing on the third line? He probably won't. But if Dubois goes, that's a huge opportunity for Donato to move up in the lineup, especially if Winnipeg isn't going to get a player back in this deal, right? I'd assume that to trade Dubois, they're probably going to retain $3 million, and in that case, there isn't going to necessarily be an impact forward coming back the other way. I doubt contending teams will want to give back a contending forward the other way in a trade for Dubois. I think they'd prefer to keep both of those guys in order to make that playoff push. So Scheifele is also a name that's probably gone. I think with Scheifele, there's going to be more interest in Wheeler. He's younger. He's obviously a bottom 5 forward defensively in the NHL, but he's a point per game guy. He's good for 80 points in a season easily. And I think Winnipeg would be more likely to retain salary on Scheifele. They've already said they won't on Blake Wheeler. And that's why I think Wheeler, although it's uncertain, he probably will be here next season. But let's say Dubois and Scheifele both go. You don't get, another top 6 center back. Now all of a sudden, Adam Lowry is probably your 1C, and Ryan Donato makes his way into that middle 6. Where is he going to play? I don't know if he'd play between Ehlers and Wheeler on the second line, but I think he's definitely on that third line. And I think in terms of the power play, I think he'd definitely be on the second power play unit. I think he'd be good with that consistent power play ice time. And he's only 25, so Winnipeg is clearly going into a more rebuilding phase. But Donato is a guy where if he plays well enough, you know, Winnipeg is incentivized to get the most out of him, right? 1 year, 1 million. You know, if he, let's say he has a slow start to the season, they trade Dubois, they trade Scheifele, and in an expanded role in the middle six, he does a lot better. Winnipeg can sign him to another extension on another prove it deal, and if he continues to play well, they can either move him at the deadline for assets, or they found a 25-year-old who's out of nowhere that nobody wanted, and they developed him into something. And I think from Donato's perspective, he's got all these talented wingers on this team. You know, I think it's a good opportunity for him to really discover his offensive potential, and he could just be one of those late bloomers. So I think at 10 with Ryan Donato, I think Winnipeg's a great fit, especially with Vesalainen going to the SHL. You know, Donato is almost a plug and play. He's another offensive minded fourth liner. So yeah, I think this would be a really good fit for both Donato and Winnipeg. Now, at number 9 is Pk Subman, a big name a couple of years ago. You know, in that Shea Weber trade, right? And you know, he's not the same guy. You know, Montreal, you know, Pk Subban was a Norris candidate. You know, arguably a top 10 defenseman in the AHL. And, you know, now he's flipped to Nashville, and he's gone now to New Jersey, and now he's in free agency. He hasn't been signed. He's 33 years old. You know, he's still a good offensive defenseman. He only had 22 points last year playing, you know, what is essentially, you know, fourth defenseman minutes. But he's still valuable as a fourth to sixth defenseman. I think on a winning team, he's probably not your fourth defenseman. You don't want him to be your fourth defenseman. And I think on, you know, on any team in the AHL, really, he could be a pretty solid sixth defenseman, fifth defenseman, right? And you know, he's flawed. He is flawed. He's still a good offensive defenseman going forward, but he's terrible on the rush. He doesn't deny entries very well, but he does have good defensive retrieval numbers. So there is some give and take with Pk Subban. I still think he is definitely deserves an NHL roster spot. I definitely think he's still a really good player. And funny enough, even despite the fact that he is in the later part of his career, I don't have him signing with a contender. I actually have him going back to Montreal on a 1-year deal. And Subban is a Canadiens legend, right? And he's got deep roots in the city, in the community. The fan base loves him, even though he's been gone for so many years. And, you know, I think especially with this team, you know, with Bear and Harris and a bunch of other young defensemen that will be coming up soon, I think they need veteran presence, right? Matheson and Savard are going to play with each other. At least that's what I'm projecting. But with Harris, you know, he's better. Subban is just straight up better than anyone else right now that they can put on that right side with Harris. And the thing with Subban is, especially with Romanov getting moved out now and Petrie gone, he's basically guaranteed power play 1 minutes. And, you know, I think his return will also drive, you know, ticket sales, although Montreal doesn't really struggle with that. But I think it'd be a nice story for Montreal fans to kind of enjoy in a season where they're probably not going to be very good again. And Montreal, despite, you know, I think only having like $300K right now, they can probably afford him after Price goes to LTIR, and if they want to be cap compliant before then, they probably send a defenseman down. But it shouldn't be a big issue. He's not making a 1.7 for 1 year. It's not a ton of money. And I think Subban, especially on that power play 1 unit, if he really rebounds, right, you know, another trade deadline, right? Montreal could move him, especially at 1.75. They retain 50%. That's a lot. There are teams that would give up a first for Pk Subban if he, you know, on the first power play unit gets back to that 50, 60 point per season kind of production. And so, yeah, there are a lot of teams that could use a guy like Pk Subban. The Isles come to mind who need a defenseman. The Rangers could probably use him, but, you know, I like the idea of PK going back home. Now to number 8 is Dansen Heinen, another surprise unqualified restricted free agent. He played 12 minutes, less than 13 minutes for Pittsburgh last season, had 33 points in 76 games, almost a 20-goal scorer. He's a great offensive bottom six player. He's Donato except better. He's a great finisher, a great goal scorer, and he skates really well, unlike Donato. And he does have a bit of a hard-nosed, gritty side to his game where he'll crash the net, he'll make hits. Maybe not as much the hits, but he's very fast and shifty, and he's tenacious on the forecheck. Um, and I think this is a guy that would be valuable on any playoff team. That's a guy you want in your bottom six, especially if he can get you goals. And I think a team that could really doesn't really need it, but would just be insane with him are the Carolina not the Panthers, the Carolina Hurricanes. And again, being an unrestricted, unqualified RFA, I don't think he's going to get as much as Pk Subban is going to, despite the fact that he's younger. Because I don't think he has the cachet that Subban does. But what I do see is he's a perfect goal scoring option for Carolina in the bottom six, as you can see in my rationale. And Jack Drury is probably going to make the Carolina Hurricanes roster headed into camp. But it worked with Seth Jarvis, but I'm not sure that you want to put Jack Drury in that position just yet. You don't know if he's ready, and if he does falter, I think it's good to have some competition in that position. More so, right now on this roster, he's a 4C, and that's a nasty forward core, by the way, if Heinen was that fourth-line center. But, they signed Andre Kasha, who I really like, but I view Heinen and Kasha very similarly. And Kasha does have the injury issue, so if Kasha does get hurt, Heinen is a plug-and-play. He brings everything that Kasha does. A goal scorer, speedy, feisty, forechecks hard. And clearly Carolina values that, which is why they brought in Kasha at 1.5 despite his injury concerns. And I think Heinen would be a good fit there too, especially at only $1 million a year. And I'm not sure that there would be a lot of teams that would be willing to offer him, $1.8, $2 million, because I do think Heinen is worth that kind of money. I'm just not sure that there are teams that would be willing to pay him that much. Clearly, Pittsburgh didn't think he was worth his qualifying offer, but then they went and got Kapanen. So maybe Pittsburgh doesn't know what they're doing. But for now, I think just to be safe, I think Carolina, if he's willing to take $1 million, would be a really, really good fit. And it's a one-year deal. If he plays really well and he moves his way up in that lineup, he could be in line for a big payday. Now, at number 7 is Sonny Milano. And you're seeing a bit of a trend with these young guys who aren't qualified by their teams that did have pretty good seasons. He played middle 6 minutes for Anaheim last year, 14 goals, 20 assists, had 34 points, was honestly pretty good. And he's a really good playmaker in 5v5 settings. I think I saw a graphic from Jay Fresh just yesterday or 2 days ago that had him in the top of the league in 5-on-5 primary assist contributions. And no, he's not going to be a great threat off the rush in terms of scoring the puck, but he does score goals in a variety of different ways, whether that's getting to the front of the net, off one-timers. He's got an underrated shot, and this past season at least, he's been good defensively. And the season before, 2 seasons before that, he didn't really put a note there. But to be fair, ice time was an issue for him. He couldn't really find his way into the lineup. And this season, in a much bigger sample size, he's done really well. Another thing with Milano is he's not a play driver from his own end, but he does very well on entry. So he's not a great exit guy. He won't be able to break the puck out of his own zone very well, but he's very good once he has the puck on the other half of the ice on breaking it in, maintaining possession, starting something for the offense. So he is a very good 5-on-5 player. And I think what he needs is, clearly he's had 1 year now where he's been pretty good. And people have said that he's playing with Zegras, he's playing with really good line mates. But I think he needs to feed into that. I think he needs to go to a place where there's going to be 2 other really good players on his line, that he'll have an opportunity to play with them and an opportunity to put up big numbers, so that 1 year from now, 2 years from now, he'll be able to get that payday as a top 6 forward, based off of 3 years worth of production. And I think a perfect team for that is actually the Toronto Maple Leafs. Kerfoot's honestly gone. We're over the cap. It's only a matter of time before he gets moved. And Sandin, there's just not a spot on the roster for him on that left side with all the veterans that we have. And he's probably going to be traded, and both of them are probably going to get moved for picks, and not guys that can help this team right now. And so if Kerfoot's getting moved out and Sandin's gone, you know, that clears up like $2+ million for Toronto to bring in guys, right? I think signing Milano on a 2-year deal, because we've seen Kyle Dubas likes to sign these guys to a little bit more term. You know, he gave Richie 2 years, he gave Kampf 2 years, he gave Milano 2 years, he gave Mrazek 3 years, he gave Yarncroc 4 years. You know, he likes to give these test guys a little bit more term, because if it does work out, number one, it brings stability to the lineup, but number two, you get a really good value player that you know produces on your team for very cheap. Michael Bunting this year, David Kampf this year, right? They worked out. They're making very little money relative to potentially what they could be worth. And I think they would try that with Sonny Milano if they were to sign him in a kind of contract. So it would be around 1.15, 1.5 million for 2 years. And I think playing with Tavares and Nylander, he could have 2 career years. He could be, you know, in the same way that Kerfoot's had a 50-point season last year, he could have a 55, 60-point season playing alongside those 2 guys. And Toronto needs a Kerfoot replacement. They need a 2-way player with offensive upside that won't cost them $3.5 million. And I think Milano is a perfect fit in that aspect. And, you know, you look at that top 9, you go, you know, is it that much worse, right? We lost Mikheyev, true, right? We probably lost Kerfoot, but that's still a very, very good top 9. And the 4th line is definitely a concern. And Toronto maybe signs a couple of other guys. Maybe Sonny Milano's teammate Sam Steele, who I will say did not make this list, but was very close. You know, there are a lot of options. But I think Sonny Milano to Toronto would be a great fit. Now, another player I thought could have been a great fit for Toronto, who Toronto actually traded for last year and tried to bring in, but it just didn't really work out in terms of contract discussions, is another former Penguin, Evan Rodriguez, joining Dansen Heinen on this list. Really productive year last year for Pittsburgh. Played all 82 games, almost a 20-goal score, had 43 points. He does remind me of Alex Kerfoot. He can play in the top 6. He can play that third line shutdown role. He's got an underrated shot. The big question with him is he is already 28, so this theoretically is around the prime of his career, and he did have a career high, you know, a career year, but it was really coming off a blazing hot start to the season, and by the time the All-Star break hit, he kind of fell off a cliff, and now the questions are, you know, is he really a 40-point guy over an 82-game season if we pay him? Or is he more of a, you know, 35, 30-point player who's, you know, still a fine third liner, but not really anyone with top 6 potential? But I think a team that will take a risk on him, provided that they clear some cap, is the Boston Bruins. Look, one of Derek Forbort or Nick Foligno are going to get moved. They're overpaid. They're not worth the money. And they're a cap sink, and they got to move them. And, you know, Marchand and McAvoy going to LTIR to start the season should probably open up the cap flexibility to sign Rodriguez. Obviously, they have to be cap compliant before then. But I think they'll be able to find a move for Foligno or for Forbort. I think Forbort will probably be the one that ends up getting moved. But Rodriguez I think is just a perfect fit for Boston, the same way that he would be a perfect fit for Toronto. He's a 2-way forward. Boston loves those guys that can play a 2-way game. It doesn't look like they're bringing back David Krejci. There were rumors for that for like 3 weeks now. It just hasn't happened. I don't think it's going to happen anymore. And if that is the case, Evan Rodriguez is a guy who can play in their middle 6 and be really good. Now, right now, I have him on the second line, but he could be flip-flopping with Charlie Coyle. It really, you know, I don't think there's a huge discrepancy between those two. But what Boston desperately needed the last 2 years has been depth scoring. And that was before Marchand and McAvoy, 2 of their offensive powerhouses, are gone now to injury, and Patrice Bergeron is not re-signed. So I think to bring in a guy who could potentially give you 20 goals a season in your middle 6, at $2 million a year for 2 years, you lock him down for the last 2 years before he hits 30. I think that would be very prudent for Boston to do. I think he'd be a good fit on that team. And you know, when if Bergeron does come back, if and Marchand and McAvoy come back healthy, I think that roster there with Hall, Zacha, Pastrnak, DeBrusk, Rodriguez, Smith, Coyle, I think that core group of guys up front, I think they could keep Boston at least interesting in the race, because I think what Boston is really counting on is building a team that's good enough to hold the fort and just make it close enough that when Marchand and McAvoy come back in January, February, that they could still maybe make a wild card spot. I think Rodriguez would be a huge part, would honestly help them a lot up front if he were to sign this contract. Now, number 5 is an older player, much like Pk Subman. That's Paul Stasny, who spent last season on Winnipeg as a second liner, really, for them, and 20 goals scored in 70 games. And he had 45 points. Who knows how many points he could put up in a full 82-game season. And he's just, a staple of consistency, right? I talked about with Cal Yarncroc. You know what you're getting with him. 35 points, 15 goals. Like, that's who he is. And for Paul Stasny, right now in his career, he's a sound two-way centerman who gives you 40 points a season, anywhere from 15 to 20 goals. He's not a great skater anymore. If you put him on a line with two really speedy guys, I think he's going to have some issues. But I think this is a guy that's going to get valued on any NHL team. And whoever does sign him is going to get a really good player. And I don't think he's going to be very expensive because of his age. And I think he wants to make one last real run of it for a Stanley Cup. And so for those reasons, I am signing a 1-year, $1.75 million deal with the St. Louis Blues. Stasny spent 4 years of his career in St. Louis, so there is a familiarity with the city, with the organization, some of his former teammates. And St. Louis is still very much a good team. They lost Husso, so Binnington and their goaltending is really their big issue, right? But Binnington has also showed that he can win a cup. You can win a cup with him. And, he's in his head right now. He hasn't been playing well, but he could. And he did take over for Husso in that playoff run and played better than Husso after Husso got absolutely train wrecked by Minnesota. But more so, adding him would honestly make St. Louis forward core one of the most dangerous in the NHL. You look at that top 9 with Buchnevich, Robert Thomas, Tarasenko, Brandon Saad, Ryan O'Reilly, Jordan Kyrou, Ivan Barbashev, Braden Shen, and Paul Stasny. That's a nasty top 9, and Achari is no slouch either. And right now, St. Louis doesn't have enough cap technically, and they still have to bring back Klim Kostin, but they can clear, $2+ million by sending down Levo and Nathan Walker, in order to be cap compliant. I think if they had the opportunity to bring back Paul Stasny, I don't think they'd have an issue letting Levo go, who they just signed to a $750,000 two-way contract. So I think that would be a really interesting signing. I think it would make a lot of sense. And so I guess we'll just keep moving on. Number 4 is Phil Kessel, the Leafs legend. He's 34 years old now. Toiling away on a terrible Arizona team last year. Played middle 6 minutes for them. 52 points, only 8 goals, which is a little bit surprising for a guy who's been touted his entire career as a goal scorer. But he's showing, even at this age, even on a terrible team, he is still one of the best offensive top 6 forwards, available right now in free agency. He doesn't play a lick of defense, but that's okay, because I don't think you're signing him to play defense. I think you're signing him to bring vision to your offense, to your power play, to add a threat to score goals. He only scored 8 goals last season, but he was on an almost 30-goal pace the season before when Arizona was playing well. So I think it's clear if you put him with line mates and, you're a good team and you have other players that can take some attention off of him, he is still very capable at his age to score, 25, 30 goals in the season. And a team that I think will give Kessel a contract is the Calgary Flames. Obviously, they've made an incredible move, grabbing Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, as well as picks and a first-round pick and Cole Schwindt in the Matthew Tkachuk trade. But they still need some more offensive firepower in that top 6. Huberdeau replaces Gaudreau in terms of his offensive output, but they didn't really get anyone to replace Tkachuk. And obviously, it's hard to replace a 24-year-old who had 115 points last season or something like that. But especially when you have around 9 million cap and you had to bring back Manny Japane and Oliver Shillington. But I think if you were to try to replace him with someone, I think Phil Kessel, for pretty cheap, less than $2 million, would be a really good option. He slots in on that second line with Backlund and Mangiapane. Coleman is a great player, but I don't know if I would play him in the top six role. I think he's best when you play him on the third line, regardless of how much they're paying him. And I think they can clear the cap if Kessel wants a bit more, because I think Monahan or Lucic will be gone by the start of the season. I don't think Calgary is going to hold on to both of them. I think one of them has to go, and even if that means buying Monahan out to clear some cap for this season to bring in a difference maker, I think they would do that. And there's obviously concerns with Kessel and how would he fit in Dale Sutter's system. He's not a two-way guy. He's not super physical. But I think Johnny Gaudreau flourished in that system, despite not being a great two-way guy. I think Phil Kessel can do the same. I don't think you need your entire team to be full of tough guys. And I think they lost a lot of that identity when Kachuk left. Kachuk's not even the toughest guy. He just talks a lot and he gets under your skin. But he was a huge part, and Branson's gone anyway. So most of that identity is gone to begin with. And I think, Sutter's defensive-minded structure is still going to be important. And I think a lot of these other players like Lindholm, Mangiapane, Backlund, and Coleman will be able to cover for that. And I think Kessel will just make sure that their offense is still dangerous, because you still need to score goals. And there's not a lot of really good goal scorers that are still available in free agency right now, that Calgary could probably realistically get with their cap situation. Now we get into the top three, and this is where it gets really interesting, because this is where I get to the three players that I think still deserve a bag, still deserve over $4 or $5 million a year. I don't know if they'll get it, and if they do get it, it's going to have to come from a team that either clears the cap or are willing to take a shot on them, because they're by no means perfect players. And at number three is John Klingberg. He's 29 years old, played for Dallas last year. Honestly, played first defenseman type minutes, 22 minutes a game. That's comparable to guys like Jake Muzzin, Morgan Riley. And he had 47 points, right? And the story of Klinberg the last couple of seasons has just been the same. He's a great power play quarterback from the blue line. He's very good with the puck going forward. He's an incredible playmaker and passer on the blue line, but he's terrible defensively, and he is an anchor on a defense pair defensively, regardless of who he plays with. I made a video for Klinberg a couple last week where, when he's on the ice, regardless if he's with Lindell or Suter, their expected goals for percentage is below 50%. They're getting outscored when he's on the ice, and so from that aspect, I projected Seattle would give him 6.85. They found a cheaper option in Justin Schultz. And I think with Dallas moving on and getting cheaper options that play a better two-way game, Klingberg is honestly left just with not a ton of options. I think the two options are between the Ottawa Senators, who could maybe sign him, and this team, the Anaheim Ducks. And the reality is the Ducks are $9 million below the cap floor. And they just need to add contracts and get to the cap floor so they don't get penalized for it. And Klingberg, he's not going to get that $6.85, almost $7 million that maybe he thought he was going to get headed into free agency. But I think on a short-term deal on a team that will guarantee him top 4 minutes, I think there are worse, and living in Anaheim, living in California, I think there are worse places to be. And at 5.75 for 2 years, he'd help Anaheim get a really solid defenseman on the right side who can bring offensive value and kind of coach Drysdale and show him that other ways to quarterback a power play. But he is also someone, after you move Shattenkirk this year at the deadline, at least that's the assumption, that you can move the year after. So you have back-to-back years where you have an asset that you can move for retention. And, obviously there's going to be concerns. Oh, how is Josh Mahura going to get impacted? He was going to have a roster spot this year on that bottom pair with Beck and Heinen, and now you bring in Klingberg and he's not going to play. Well, Shattenkirk's probably going to get moved. I don't know if it's now or at the trade deadline, but by the trade deadline, Josh Mahura should have a roster spot on the Ducks. And he might have a top 4 spot on the Anaheim Ducks in 2 years' time. So I wouldn't be too worried about his development. But I think they're going to get value for Shattenkirk, and they can get value for Klinberg 2 years from now, and it helps them reach the cap floor, and they're not tying themselves down with term. They're paying a guy who probably in a year where there's more cap space, probably could have gotten 6-7 million, and you're probably going to get him at a little bit of a discount. He's still very much in his prime, and he'll be able to help your team. He'll be able to help your young guys. Hopefully, he doesn't teach Drysdale and Benoit and Vakanainen how to play defense. But in terms of going forward, I think he can be a really great mentor. And I think there are a few other places that would be able to offer him the type of money that he's looking for. On top of just needing a player, right? Because I think Anaheim needs a guy like Klinberg as much as he needs them. And to be fair, Anaheim could just trade for bad contracts and get picks. But I think with guys like Zegras and Terry and Drysdale, being so, NHL ready almost, like they've been playing in the NHL. Zegras and Terry have been exceptional in the NHL. I think you want to pick up the rebuild a little bit, right? Obviously, you don't want your team to just be so bad all of the time and to just keep losing with these young guys, because I think that would damage their confidence. So I think it is important to have a healthy injection of some veteran players that are NHL level, right? You don't want these guys to be playing with scrubs. So yeah, I think Anaheim would be a great fit here for Klinberg. And number 2 is Patrice Bergeron, and I'm not going to do a breakdown for this one. He's either going to retire or he's going to resign in Boston on a pretty team-friendly contract. It just depends on whether or not he wants to come back. If he doesn't come back, I think Evan Rodriguez to Boston is even more likely. And if he does come back to Boston, I think Rodriguez is still a sign they should look into, because then that team is definitely a team that could still be in the wild card spot by 2023 when McAvoy and Marchand come back from injury. So there's no point in talking too much about Bergeron. He's a Bruin for life. He's not going to go anywhere. And number 1 is my boy, Nazm Kadri, 31 years old, off a cup, was over a point per game. If he stayed healthy, he probably would have gone to that 95-plus point mark. Elite offensive player, definitely a number 1 center. He's not an elite two-way guy, but he's not exactly terrible on his own end. We know his defensive, his physicality in the playoffs. That's why he's not on the Leafs anymore. He's also 192 pounds, not 292. That's a typo. But just a really good player. And there have been talks that he's going to go back to the Avs, and I think that's still very much possible, but I'm just not confident that the Avs are going to move Sam Girard in order to clear the cap to sign him. And that's why I have him going to the New York Islanders. Until there are reports that come out that the Avs are committed to moving a 24-year-old young defenseman on a steal of a contract in order to bring back Kadri, a 31-year-old centerman who is really a luxury good for them, I'm not going to buy that the Avs are going to bring him back. And I think the Isles make a ton of sense because they have the cap to bring him in. And, to be able to bring back Romanov and Dobson on their probably bridge deals and Kadri, they probably send Cal Klinberg and Matt Martin to the minors. But I also don't think that's a huge issue because Trotz is not the coach anymore. They fired him. They chose Matt Barzal as the guy that they're going to run behind instead of Trotz. And Barzal wants a more offensive-minded team, which is why a guy like Kadri would make perfect sense. And Klinberg and Matt Martin were important for Barry Trotz because they brought a physical edge, but maybe not so much under this new kind of Isles team. Maybe they want to be more offensive-minded. And sending them down, they're going to clear. No one's going to claim Klinberg and Matt Martin at their contracts. That's going to clear. That's going to save them about $2 million against the cap, right? Create some extra space. And that $2 million right there probably gets you Dobson back. And they have 11 or so million. So Kadri getting a 9x7 is not out of the question from a team like the Isles. I think that's what it would take for him to go to New York instead of just going back to Colorado on maybe a 1-year, $6.5 million deal. Because I think with Kadri, he either wins one more cup with Colorado or tries to make a real deep run with the Avs and have another career year. or he wants that bag. He wants that long-term extension. I think that's what the Islanders are going to have to offer him. Um, so if Kadri doesn't go back to the Avs, I think the Isles make by far the most sense for him. And yeah, so these are my top 10 free agents and where I think they will go. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you didn't like what I had to say, you don't agree with me, you think the video is not good, don't like the video. But if you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button. And we're gonna have more videos coming out this week that we've got planned. So hopefully you guys are looking forward to that. And until then, I will see you next time.